A family of three: Tony Hastings, a quiet mathematics professor, his wife Laura, and their teenage daughter India set out on a late-night drive through the empty highways of West Texas on their way to Marfa. The road ahead is endless, dark, and almost completely deserted, stretching through miles of open land with barely another car in sight. From the very beginning, India makes it obvious she doesn't want to be there. She keeps herself distracted with her phone, barely engaging with her parents, until the signal finally disappears somewhere deep in the isolation of the desert. Through casual conversation, we learn they're still nearly 3 hours away from their destination. Hours pass, and eventually the exhaustion settles in. Laura and India drift off to sleep while Tony continues driving through the darkness alone, until distant headlights suddenly appear ahead of them. Two vehicles are blocking the road. Tony honks, expecting them to move aside, and at first they do. But almost immediately, one of the cars packed with a group of men begins circling back around them, taunting and provoking the family. India, irritated and fearless, flips them off through the window. That single gesture changes everything. The men become aggressive almost instantly, speeding recklessly around the family's car, swerving into their lane, bumping their vehicle, and repeatedly pulling in front of them while demanding they stop. Tony refuses and keeps driving, desperate to get away. For one brief moment, it seems like they've escaped. The darkness swallows the other cars and the highway falls silent again. But only for a few minutes. The men return, this time angrier, more violent, and far more determined. Without warning, they speed ahead, cut directly in front of Tony's car, and force the family off the road into the middle of nowhere. Welcome to Sandy's Timeline. Today, we're diving into Nocturnal Animals, the 2016 psychological thriller that turns one terrifying night into something far darker and far more personal. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Sandy's Timeline. Let's get into it. Almost immediately, Tony locks the car doors as the three men step out of their vehicle. Their names are Ray, Lou, and Turk, and from the second they approach, it's obvious Ray is the one in control. Ray claims Tony should have pulled over the moment the accident happened, implying that Tony somehow damaged their car. A ridiculous accusation, considering they were the ones deliberately ramming and harassing the family moments earlier. Trying to keep the situation from escalating, Tony calmly offers to exchange information and settle any supposed damages the proper way. Then one of the men notices that one of Tony's tires has a puncture. When Tony tries to start the car, it becomes immediately obvious they are not going anywhere. Ray steps forward and offers to fix it, and for the briefest possible moment, there is a flicker of hope that maybe this ends here. Maybe these men are just rough around the edges and nothing more. Tony steps out to retrieve the spare, turning back to reassure Laura and India through the window, even though the fear on all three of their faces tells a completely different story. Then Ray tells Tony to have Laura and India get out of the car. They are reluctant, but they comply, moving close together, holding on to each other. A police car speeds past without stopping, and from the way the men react, laughing, completely unbothered, it is clear that whatever happens out here in the dark, no one is coming to help. Ray starts inventing a confrontation, accusing Tony of being arrogant, of looking down on them, of disrespecting them. Accusations designed not to be answered, but to justify what comes next. They start manhandling the Laura and India. Tony tries to intervene and takes a beating for it, ending up with bleeding nose on the ground. For a moment, things calm down again. The tire is finally replaced. But then Ray casually suggests that maybe they should separate the family, just to make sure they don't try anything. Tony immediately refuses, but it doesn't matter. Ray and Turk suddenly grab Laura and India, force them into one of the cars, and speed off into the darkness. Tony stands there stunned, frozen in horror beside Lou, realizing too late that he has completely lost control of the situation. Then Lou forces him into the remaining car and tells him the only way he'll ever see his wife and daughter again is to follow them. Lou directs Tony off the main road and onto a dark dirt road that seems to go on forever. As the minutes stretch out, Tony begins to understand with growing dread that these men have no intention of taking him anywhere safe. At one point, they pass his own car parked on the side of the road, but Lou forces him to keep driving until they reach a dead end where he orders Tony out of the car and drives off, leaving him completely alone in the middle of nowhere in the pitch dark. A few minutes later, headlights appear and Tony hides. It is Lou and Ray, calling out for him to come forward so he can see his family. But the tone of it is all wrong. It sounds less like a promise and more like a trap designed to lure him out. Ray's frustration with Lou for letting Tony slip away is barely contained. They search for a while and then eventually drive off, leaving the darkness and silence behind them. Tony spends the rest of the night walking, from darkness into daylight, pushing through exhaustion and fear and a grief he doesn't yet have words for, until he finds his way back to the road. He eventually reaches the main road and stumbles his way to a nearby farmhouse, where he calls the police. By then, he's emotionally shattered, consumed by helplessness, guilt, and the unbearable realization that he failed to protect the two people he loved most. Detective Bobby is assigned to the case, and together, he and Tony retrace the route from the night before, following the fragments of Tony's memory deeper into the desert. Then they find them. Near an abandoned shack, lying naked in the dirt, are the bodies of Laura and India. With the men still at large, Bobby works as closely as possible with Tony, who is completely falling apart beneath the surface but holding himself together just enough to keep moving. Bobby informs him that another couple was harassed on the same road in the same way, which means this wasn't random. Tony is asked to submit his prints so they can be separated them from any others found in the trunk of his car, making the evidence cleaner and easier to work with. Then comes the detail that no father or husband should ever have to hear. Bobby tells Tony that Laura died from a fractured skull consistent with a hammer or baseball bat. India died from suffocation and a broken arm. Both of them had been assaulted. A nearby trailer was also identified with Laura's prints on the bedpost. The owner had not been around, suggesting the men broke in and used it. Tony absorbs all of it in silence. There is nothing left to say. Bobby sends Tony photographs of a suspect whose prints match those found in the trailer and in the car, but Tony doesn't recognize the man. The trail goes cold and Tony returns to his life, or what remains of it, trying to build some kind of daily routine just to preserve his sanity. Then a year later, Bobby calls. Lou has been caught in a botched robbery and charged as an accomplice in the murders of Laura and India. Turk was fatally shot in the same robbery. That leaves Ray Marcus, the man who started everything that night on the road as the last one still walking free. And Bobby makes it clear that bringing Ray to justice through the system is going to be far harder than either of them wants to accept. Bobby manages to arrest Ray, but is almost immediately forced to release him. The evidence against him is entirely circumstantial, and the system, as Tony always feared, is not going to deliver what he needs. Then Bobby delivers news of his own. He has been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and is on the verge of being pushed out of the force entirely. With nothing left to lose, he sits across from Tony and asks him a direct question. Is he willing to step outside the boundaries of procedure to see this through? Tony doesn't hesitate. He agrees. Together, they track down Ray and Lou and abduct them. When Lou attempts to flee, Bobby shoots him dead, but Ray manages to escape. Tony tracks him alone to the abandoned shack where Laura and India were killed. Standing in the same place where he lost everything, Tony finally comes face to face with the man responsible. Ray admits to what he did and calls Tony weak, delivering the cruelest possible version of a confession. Tony shoots him. In the struggle that follows, Ray hits him across the head with a fire poker, and Tony loses consciousness. When he comes around, Ray has already succumbed to the gunshot wound and lies dead on the floor. Tony stumbles outside wounded, and in the chaos of everything, he falls on his own gun and accidentally shoots himself and dies. And then the story ends. Only then do we realize as an audience what we've actually been watching. This entire tragedy has not been unfolding in real time. It has been playing out inside the pages of a manuscript being read by a woman named Susan Morrow. Susan is the ex-wife of the novel's author, Edward Sheffield. 20 years earlier, Susan sat across from her mother Anne as Anne warned her not to marry Edward. Anne saw him as weak, overly sensitive, and painfully unambitious, a man incapable of giving Susan the life she wanted. But Susan married him anyway. For a while, they built a life together. Edward loved her deeply, but over time, Susan grew frustrated with what she viewed as his lack of ambition and emotional fragility. Eventually, she began an affair with a wealthy businessman named Hutton Morrow, a man who represented everything Edward was not: powerful, successful, decisive. Even while Edward desperately tried to save their marriage, Susan had already emotionally left him behind. Then came the cruelest betrayal of all. Susan became pregnant with Edward's child, but chose to terminate the pregnancy so nothing would stand in the way of her future with Hutton. Shortly afterward, she divorced Edward completely. Now, 20 years later, Susan owns an upscale art gallery in Los Angeles and lives inside the expensive, polished life she once thought she wanted. But the illusion is cracking. Her marriage to Hutton is emotionally dead. He is openly unfaithful, barely present in her life, and Susan no longer even has the energy to confront it. She moves through her luxurious home like a ghost, struggling to sleep, relying on medication, haunted by choices she can never undo. Then, out of nowhere, a manuscript arrives. It is Edward's first novel, Nocturnal Animals, dedicated to her. The title comes from Edward's old nickname for Susan because she used to stay awake at night, restless and anxious beside him. As Susan reads the story of Tony Hastings, she slowly realizes what Edward has really written. The novel is not just fiction. Tony is Edward. Laura is Susan. And the brutal helplessness Tony experiences throughout the story is Edward's way of showing her exactly what it felt like to love her, lose her, and watch helplessly as she destroyed everything they once had together. The film ends as Susan finishes reading the manuscript, completely consumed by what it reveals. And for the first time in years, Susan contacts Edward and arranges to meet him for dinner at an upscale restaurant. She arrives dressed carefully, nervous in a way she hasn't felt in years. And then she waits. Minutes turn into hours as the restaurant slowly begins to empty around her, and Edward never comes. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to Sandy's Timeline for more recap like this.